It's Tuesday, June 17th, 2025, and we have a moderate risk of severe weather out here in southern Kansas and northern Oklahoma. Then we have an enhanced risk of severe weather, which is pretty much in the same region. It just extends out a tad bit further. Then we have a slight risk of severe weather, which extends up into the high plains and then much of the central plains. Then our marginal covers pretty much the entire area of the central plains. And of course, we have a marginal risk of severe weather out here stretching down into Dixie Alley, then the Appalachian Mountains and Mid-Atlantic. Today's risk of severe weather is going to be mostly entirely associated with that threat of damaging winds, with a high 45% hatched risk of damaging winds out here in southern and Kansas and northern Oklahoma, surrounded by a 30% moderate hatched risk of damaging winds as well. And severe winds could be expected pretty much anywhere in the central plains today. Then also out here in our Dixie Alley, Appalachian Mountains up into the Mid-Atlantic region. The Storm Prediction Center has said that winds up to 70 to 100 miles an hour are possible out in this region today. And then we have a hatched moderate 30% risk of hail out here in our southern Kansas and northern Oklahoma, which actually stretches up into a little bit more of central Kansas. But large hail could be expected anywhere from the high plains out into the central plains today. Then there's also a 5% slight tornado risk out here in our southern Kansas and northern Oklahoma risk area, where I would actually not rule out a strong tornado today. And then also a 2% marginal risk of tornadoes out here in the Mid-Atlantic. And then this weather pattern is not done yet we have a enhanced risk of severe weather out here in the Midwest for our day 2 outlook, surrounded by a large slight risk extending from the central plains up into the Midwest. And this is also expected to bring all hazards of severe weather. And then we have a day 3 slight risk out here in the Mid-Atlantic to northeast. Here's a simulated reflectivity from the HRRR, and we can actually notice a lot of storms out here in our risk area today, which are expected to sort of hinder that environment. But as we can see, as we move a little bit more further in time, these storms are actually expected to clear out, which will allow for this area to sort of recover and build up those favorable storm materials today as we push forward. And something important that this cluster of storms out here is going to leave is an outflow boundary out here, which is going to push southward and could be a pretty big factor for storms today. But our first convection of the day is going to be out here in Colorado, and these storms in their initial state, when they're more discrete, are going to bring that all hazards threat. So tornadoes, possibly very large hail and damaging winds. And then as we move forward a bit, these storms are expected to sort of congeal more into a line, and that's when that wind threat up in the high plains region is really going to maximize. And it looks like later into the afternoon, we could actually see a round 2 of storms in this region as well, with a more discrete mode. So bringing that all hazards threat for severe weather again. And then in our main risk area in southern Kansas to northern Oklahoma, we see in the early afternoon, we get a couple of discrete cells out here in front of our main line. And this is actually going to be what I think the most concerning corridor for tornadoes is going to be today. We can see that these storms are going to be right on that outflow boundary, taking advantage of a pretty insane tornado environment out here in our Wichita, Kansas region. And these storms could produce massive hail, damaging winds, and actually a pretty robust threat for tornadoes. But moving a bit more forward, getting into mid to late afternoon, we see our main line kind of explode back here with a embedded supercell look, so bringing that threat for large hail, possibly tornadoes, and this is when our damaging wind threat is really expected to ramp up. We also see some discrete convection down here in western Oklahoma, and those storms are expected to be more higher based, so that's going to mean mostly a damaging wind and giant hail threat. And also we're going to continue to see more organization in this line of storms out here in southern to southeastern Kansas as we move more forward into the day. And then moving into the evening hours, we can see that our storms that were in front of this line are pretty much dissipated entirely as they fall behind the outflow boundary and kind of get sucked up into this line. And our storms in western Oklahoma also appear to be falling apart as we go into the evening hours. And as the low-level jet starts to kick in, we actually get more convection on the tail end of our MCS out here, which will bring that all hazards threat to this region. And it looks like southern Kansas could actually get a round 2 with another strong line pushing through that area. Here's a weather sounding from our southern to southeastern Kansas area where those discrete frontal cells are expected to be. And this is probably one of the more insane photographs I've ever seen. We have a giant curve. And we also have down here in our box, we have close to 500 surface helicity. We have more than ample low level shear. And then we have also really good deep level shear to help organize these storms and make those powerful updrafts. Our lowest cloud levels are going to be pretty low to the ground, so definitely conducive for that tornado threat. We have some veering in our winds, which is going to help to spin those updrafts. Now, one of the things that we do notice that could quite hinder our tornado threat today, despite all these other insane parameters, is some stable air at the surface. So we can see that our low level lapse rate is actually going to be negative, and that's actually going to mean that there's going to be some capping in this region today. So that could definitely hinder these storms, but our overall lapse rates are still going to be pretty solid at 8.0 Celsius decreasing per kilometer. We have some dry air aloft, which could help with lifting and could help to accelerate those downdrafts. Our cape out here is going to be definitely enough, nearing 3,000. We're going to have a solid amount of 3 cape, which is definitely going to help with that tornado threat. And then we have quite a bit of mixed layer cape near that freezing layer, which could help with that large hail threat. And then our precipitable water is going to be 1.7 inches. So that can mean stronger downdrafts and larger hail. So to summarize this is going to be a pretty solid tornado environment, except for our capping, which could hinder that out here. And the possibility of large hail and damaging winds is also definitely a possibility. And another thing I'd like to mention is spin up tornadoes on our line of storms is definitely going to be a concern throughout the day. Here's a weather sounding in western Oklahoma where we're expecting a couple of storms. And we can see that we have some curvature in our photograph. We see a solid amount of surface helicity, okay low level shear, and then probably enough deep layer shear to spin those storms. So 36 knots, we'd like to see 40, but that's pretty close. A higher lowest cloud level, so that's going to be indicative of more elevated storms, so an increased hail and wind threat. We see some wind veering, which is going to help to spin those updrafts. We see solid amounts of moisture out here. We see solid low level lapse rates, and overall lapse rates are going to be 8.9 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, so quite good out there. Pretty good mixing, so some dry air aloft. So that means that downdrafts could be stronger with these storms and lift will be increased. We see that our cape out here is going to be really good at 3,600, and then we see a quite a bit of cape up here near our freezing level, which also could be indicative of a large hail threat. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.43 inches, and that's going to be coupled with a 2,000 downdraft cape. So with these storms could definitely produce intense damaging winds, pose a small but non-zero threat for tornadoes, and also foster that threat for giant hail. Our last sounding for our high plains risk area today, we see that our photograph isn't really indicating something super crazy at first. We see that our surface helicity is pretty much 0 and our low level shear is going to be literally 0. But because of the nature of this region and other ingredients, I'm actually not going to rule out a tornado or two in this region. And then our deep layer shear is going to be pretty low at around 30. So these storms could have trouble sustaining and getting organized today. But we do see some veering in our winds helping to spin those updrafts. Our lowest cloud level is going to be low enough for tornadoes to be a possibility. Our lapse rates is going to be 8.3 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, so quite good. And our low level lapse rates are going to be really good. Also couple that with really good moisture for this region, and then some dry air aloft, helping with that downdraft acceleration and the lifting of these storms. Then also a decent amount of cape up here near our freezing layer, which could also be cause for some giant hail out here in this region. Our cape is going to be nearing 3,000, so really good juiced up atmosphere out here. Our downdraft cape isn't going to be super impressive, and our precipitable water isn't going to be super high either. But our 3 cape is going to be 135, which could help to foster that tornado threat. So in summary, these storms could produce an all hazard threat out here in the upper plains. So tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds.